I wanted to have this conversation too, and why I just wanted to say this, that if you are a queer survivor and you haven't told anybody or you're afraid, I see you. I believe you. I don't know if you want to put my email address up after this,
Absolutely.
but yeah, let's chat. I don't know. I'm really motivated to create some space or find some connection with other people that are exploring life like I'm exploring right now. And I know that I'm not alone. I just haven't really met too many people that are having this conversation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Or if this is your first time joining in, thank you for being with us. This podcast is a safe space for victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault to share their stories and connect with others who've been through similar experiences. I believe that sharing our stories is the first step to healing, and my hope is that the SAS podcast will help victims and survivors feel less alone and more empowered. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Pod Vlog studio in St. George, Utah, and I'm here each week to provide a platform for victims and survivors to tell their story and for experts and professionals to offer insights and information to help us all on our healing path and to provide an education on being trauma-informed in order to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape or sexual assault. If you are a victim, survivor, or know someone who is, or if you investigate or prosecute rape or sexual assault cases, or if you provide treatment, counseling, or interact with victims or survivors of rape or sexual assault in any capacity, I urge you to listen to this podcast. Remember, you are not alone, and we are all here to support you. Activation warning. This episode contains explicit and graphic descriptions of suicide, self-harm, sexual assault, and rape. Discretionary caution and action is required. This episode is not for children. Please use extreme self-care in listening to this episode and seek immediate help through the National Suicide Hotline by dialing 988 if you are emotionally activated or triggered by the content of this episode. Or if you are activated and need help from the National Sexual Assault Telephone Hotline, call 1-800-656-HOPE. That's 1-800-656-4673. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. This is episode 50, and for many, the long-awaited part 2 of my interview with Bailie, even though it's only been a week since part 1 was posted. And even though this is the concluding episode of Bailie's interview, it is not the last time you'll be hearing from Bailie. I've decided to invite her back often, and Bailie has agreed to be my guest as frequently as plausible. In this episode, Bailie and I pick up where we left off last week. I've included the last 20 seconds of her prior episode as context for the beginning of this week's episode. So let's dive in and hear what Bailie has to say to finish up this conversation, and I'll catch you on the other side. Here's Bailie.
Just not being in tune with myself and not being honest. And again, falling back on my old survival mechanisms of perfectionism, overachieving, and not letting anybody know or see what is really going on with me. And I became a master at those 3 things throughout my life, especially the overachieving. Like I was joking with you before we started recording, how has my life really been this awesome, or has it really just been one big trauma response? Because in a lot of ways I could look back and I could be like, yeah, the reason why I didn't go to grad school was because I wound up being in a restaurant, putting on a uniform for one day and saying shit and fuck a million times and being like, well, this is great. And the drugs are incredible in this field. Like, this is what I want to do. So like, that's how I got into the restaurant industry. And I was like, well, I'm also a women's studies major, so I'm going to revolutionize the restaurant industry, which, I think to a degree, maybe I was able to have some influence in the butchery world, because when I really honed in on what I wanted to do, which was butchery, which was a male dominated field, I did attain a point where I received some semblance of 15 minutes of fame as being kind of a known female butcher. I was teaching classes and all that kind of stuff. So I did fulfill these things I wanted to do, but really my motivation was the drugs and alcohol and the uniform, and just that it was messy, fun work. And I got to work with a bunch of dudes. I loved it. But was it the healthiest choice for me? Should I have gone to grad school? Probably, but I would have wound up right where I am right now. That's the cool thing about life is it's taken me on this really weird detour of what I wanted to be when I went to UC Santa Cruz and was a women's studies major. And I thought that I wanted to be a social worker. I thought that maybe I wanted to get into sex education and stuff. And then I took this really weird detour, but here I am now, the director of training and technical assistance at an amazing organization doing awesome work where part of my job requires me to show up authentically as who I am and share my story, because LGBTQ people have very unique life experiences, and not a lot of people know how to serve our community in victim services, in social services, in the medical field. We've come a long way in terms of acceptance and tolerance of LGBTQ people, but we still have a lot of ways to go in terms of how to really help our community. Now I'm going to just get up on my other soapbox. It's a really hard moment to be into a CSA survivor from the LGBTQ community when there's so much anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, especially focused on grooming, and the conflation of the sexual violence prevention movement in educating people about what grooming is. And now you have that actual language and education being co-opted and weaponized to hurt the LGBTQ community. And so I'm a person that sits at that intersection. I exist at the intersection right now where all this stuff is happening. And it goes back to what you're saying before, the isolation. Do I want to be an out queer person working with kids right now when I could be accused of being a groomer? That's the world that survivors like me are living in right now. And it's a reality that I also think that we're not talking about. And I don't think that we have a lot of spaces for queer survivors like me to say what I just said, and to live with all of that. So that's also partly why I wanted to have this conversation too, and why I just wanted to say this, that if you are a queer survivor and you haven't told anybody or you're afraid, I see you. I believe you. I don't know if you want to put my email address up after this,
Absolutely.
but let's chat. I don't know. I'm really motivated to create some space or find some connection with other people that are exploring life like I'm exploring right now.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm not alone. I just haven't really met too many people that are having this conversation.
Bailie, with your permission, I will put up whatever you send me, whatever way you give me permission to let people get in touch with you, because I think it is critical. And I want to talk more about that. You broached it as a topic. I know there is no way to just say, here's the solution to the problem that you just addressed. And that is the issue of being accused of grooming when you're trying to talk to children who are LGBTQ and are trying to determine what the heck's going on in my life. And you are, as a director, being looked at under this microscope of, what are you doing to these children? What are you saying to these children? How are you grooming them? This needs to be talked about. This needs to be addressed. How are you doing that?
When you were saying that and you're explaining, people are saying that you're this. I'm lucky enough to actually be living in California, living in a community where people aren't saying that to me.
Right.
It's just an unspoken fear of what's happening outside of this state, and it's happening within California as well.
Yeah.
Really, what I've found to be a solution, and I feel can be a solution to a lot of things, is you just have a conversation and talk to somebody about what's going on, if you're able to have the conversation. So, for instance, I have some people in my circle that don't always understand why I have to say the things that I say, or think that I might be too much, or are threatened by the things that come out of my mouth. I've had someone tell me, people really listen to you as if it was a negative thing, that kind of a thing. So I think that it's just having the conversation and talking about it, which is why in providing spaces where you can have courageous conversations, which is what we really try to do with our education and the best practices trainings that our organization does, because it provides a safe space for people to ask those fearful questions and to have a conversation with someone from the community living the experience. I think it just all starts there with what we're doing right now.
I'm so in agreement with that. And I tell my listeners that, and other guests, the same thing. If we can't talk about it, we're not going to fix anything. And
Yeah.
this is a platform where you can be safe and where you can talk about it and where I want it talked about.
But I think that the other thing to think about too is who gets to talk about it? Who has the space to talk about it? What voices are we hearing from? And in my experience, there's not a lot of spaces for queer people to talk about this. Like there's a type of victim out there, and a lot of times I think that the people that are actually experiencing the harm and that are victims don't fit the mold of what a victim should look like in our society. And therefore certain voices get elevated over others, so we're not hearing a lot from the queer community. We're not hearing a lot from communities of color. I just talked about the intersection of child sexual abuse and LGBTQ, but what about the other people that also have the intersection of race? And this is something that I feel like was impacted in my family. I was talking about before how it was before me. My parents and my mom, I'm half Spanish, so my mom is too, but she grew up in a home where we weren't really leaning into our culture. I mean, I can't say indefinitely what it was because I haven't had these conversations with my mom or my grandmother or anything, but I always kind of got the impression of like, get married to a nice white man and everything will be fine. Because growing up, it was like, do you have a boyfriend? How's school going? And do you have a boyfriend? I could barely speak my great grandmother's language. And the two things she would ask me were, do you have a boyfriend and how's school going? That's like the only English that I got to share with them. That's already creating, in terms of like, do you have a boyfriend? I mean, I'm already isolated from you because I don't relate to that question at all because no, I don't have a boyfriend. I can't even talk about that because there's no queer kids and I feel so different and isolated in that respect. There's the cultural aspect too. And what I'm really just trying to get at is like, I feel like there are certain voices that are elevated more than others. And this shouldn't be a space where we're doing that, and I'm not saying that you are, others are. It's just, that's what I've just kind of like noticed. And so I'm also into not erasing people like our culture likes to do, colonialism and whatever, just erasing people. And because to a degree, I feel like with what's happening socially, politically right now, with being a child sexual abuse survivor, being LGBTQ and all this conflation of like the grooming language and all that, and that harming our community, we're being silenced. Queer survivors are being silenced and they are being ignored in that conversation. And that's causing harm.
It is, and I agree with you. But I also want to encourage you to do something that we talked about also before the recording started. You really need to get a podcast going.
All right, you want to challenge me? Let's do this.
I'm going to tell you exactly how to do this, especially since you've got access to a studio. You already know how to talk. You're doing an amazing job, and you're going to take that experiential education you have. First of all, I'm so thankful that you're alive and that you are actually aware of that voice that says you shouldn't be, and that you're doing everything you can to say, yes, I should be, because this is just one more reason to be that really bright light in people's lives. But yeah, I'm going to coach you all through this, and we're going to see a podcast going with you and your coworkers and your wife and your colleagues. It's going to be huge right off the bat.
Oh, well, thank you. Now I'm blushing. That's what I need in life. One more project, because I'm not busy enough with, work, suicide prevention council, being a paddling coach, less than adequate cat mom. That's what my wife calls me.
Less than adequate cat mom.
So, yeah.
Let me redirect this conversation. Let's talk about that healing journey and where you are and what you do, and what especially you're going to do when you and I stop talking. Because whenever you talk about this, it brings up more memories. Yeah. It's just the way our brains work. So having told me part of your story, whenever you talk about and start remembering things, those memories, those things that you've talked about will activate other memories over the next few hours, and then also the next few days and weeks and months. And you'll think back, yeah, when I was talking to Dave on his podcast, I said this, and now I'm thinking, wow, I also remember this. All of a sudden, another implicit memory is going to pop out of nowhere. All this to ask, what are you going to do, Bailie, to take care of yourself through these next several days, weeks, months, when these memories become activated?
That's a really, really good question. One of the things that I started literally like the second day that I left work, because I'm a type A and very much like, if I'm going to be healing, I need to have a healing plan. And my wife was like, you need to not have a plan. How about not having a plan? So starting with not having a plan is what I'm going to do. I just kind of collecting things over the year. And what's really been helpful for me is carving out time in the morning and in the evening to really just be and sit with myself with the stuff that arises. And so meditation was something that I actually, right after the bridge thing happened, I went to therapy. I started actually practicing meditation. I belonged to a center in Sonoma and was going fairly regularly and really learned and was embracing the practice of meditation. And that really was helpful. And then, of course, I was like, well, I got better. I don't need these tools anymore, whatever. One of the things I reintegrated was meditation. And so that's something that I still do. My practice has evolved into different ways and different things. I'm a big fan of taking baths. I'm a Cancer sign. I'm a water sign. I'm a moon baby. But I really, really find that being in water, around water is good for me too. So I am an avid paddler. I do outrigger paddling and stand-up paddleboarding. And so I'll be getting in the river tomorrow. I have a practice of leaving the shit on the shore and paddling away. So that will be something that I can access. I am learning and kind of dabbling with breath work right now. So when feelings or things arise, or just noticing when I'm not breathing and being intentional about how I'm breathing and setting out time to kind of do that. I will, right after this, I'm calling my mom, which is kind of a new thing for me. I talked to her yesterday, and it was actually really important for me to let my parents know that I was doing this so that when it came out, because I told them a year ago, when I made the decision, I heard the voice. The voice was like, you need to tell your parents what's up. And I also needed that closure. Like, they were moving to Michigan. They were selling the house on Markel Street. I had always kind of attached myself to that as this place I could go to, a point of time, point of reference where I could go and reflect and remember who I was, the things that happened to me. And that was going away. And it really did affect me. I know I'm kind of deviating from your question. The going home and telling my parents was a huge thing, and it was a big closure thing. And right after I did that, all my fears of them not believing me did not come true. They were so supportive. My dad cried. Some things were disclosed at the table that I can't really talk about because they're not my story to share. I learned at that moment that I was not alone. I was alone in a lot of ways, but I wasn't alone in the effects of being a person that has lived with sexual trauma in their history, because people that were at that table shared that history with me too, in their own way, which was really beautiful. I don't know if conversations about their history and my history will ever happen. I've talked about it with my therapist, maybe talking to some of these people in my life. I've been asked if I would ever talk to, or do I know what happened to the person that harmed me? And, you'll notice that I'm really intentional in using that word, the person that harmed me. I'm not calling this person an offender. This is a person that at one point in their life caused me harm. I don't have the most positive feelings towards them. I can't say that I'm friends with that person. I'm not connected to them in any way, but I don't want to be sharing their name. I don't want this to be about them. And I also recognize that this is a kid who was in 5th grade and another girl who was in 5th grade. These are 2 kids that were acting out violence on me. What the heck was going on in their lives so much that was making them harm me that much? Okay. And then I think back of this kid, and I know that this kid didn't have the most support growing up. And I know that this kid didn't have parents around. And I know that there was probably stuff happening to them as well. I'm not at a place where I'm all is forgiven or whatnot. It's really heavy to hang on to that. There were years where I did, and I have moments still where I'm just like, what the F? And I'm trying to approach more of people in my life that I've had negativity towards, these negative feelings about, with more of like a lens of compassion, of like, you've been harmed too. I was harmed because of what happened to you. And I'm the extension of this, who knows what I'm an extension of in their life or life in general, Yeah. What was the question?
Loves that.
You can go ahead and
I gotta leave this in
wherever you want. I'm just giving you all this content. You can just, yeah.
It was, what are you going to do to take care of yourself? And
take care of yourself. Okay, let's get back to that. Calling my mom. So I called and talked to her yesterday and told her I was going to do this. And I'm going to call her and tell her that it went really well and that I made a new friend and that I hope that she listens to it. I'll send a link.
Right. Good.
Yeah. Joy, play, laughter, things that bring that to my life make me feel better. So I try to put myself in places where I'm going to experience those things. So it could be hanging out with my cats, watching a movie with my wife, going and hanging out with a friend. Like I was talking about sports being really important when I was growing up. Sports was a great outlet for me. I played soccer, I played softball. I really threw myself into sports when I was younger because it was a really healthy outlet because I had so much pent up anger and frustration, and I was really rambunctious. And yeah.
You mentioned your wife. And if I'm going somewhere I shouldn't, you just stop me and
no, let's go there. Let's go to my wife.
She sounds like a huge support system.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
She's a amazing woman. Cara May, I met her in 2015 when I was kind of towards the end of my last relationship. And it's actually a beautiful story. It's a really funny story. So I was at the time working at the Fatted Calf. So I was a partner there. This was a meat shop in Napa. I was in transition of leaving that place and starting my own outdoor recreation business. So also, I am an amateur athlete, and I have a history of actually being a winning triathlete. I was on a circuit for a while in my mid-30s where I was really successful, and I had sponsorships, and it was this whole thing. Wow. So I was leaving the restaurant industry to do my own thing, and I happened to be off of a lesson or something, and I wound up in my shop, and this woman walks in with a customer that I knew. I knew who the customer was. And I was like, oh, her friend is like super cute. Like, note to self, ask Remy about her cute friend. And then that afternoon, the people I had given a tour to or a lesson to had invited me to like their birthday party that evening. So I go to this party and I meet this person and I'm like, hey, do you know any like women that are into women? Like, I'm really fresh out of a relationship and I want to meet some people and have some fun. And this guy was like, well, do you know Cara May? And I'm like, well, no. And so he had kind of texted her like, hey, I just met like the hottest lesbian ever. And so we all decided to meet up at a bar. I didn't know who this person was. And so we're at the bar and I look over and in walks Cara May. And it turns out that she is the person that came in with the customer before who I was like, note to self, we need to ask about this person. And so I was, yes. Oh my gosh, the universe delivers. Like, this is the best day ever. So I played it totally cool. I was like, yeah, hey, what's up? You know, and we hung out that whole night. And we wound up on the couch that night, just kind of falling asleep. But we were spooning. And I remember I rolled over and she rolled over and spooned me. And I was, oh my gosh, I'm in love. I fell in love immediately. Like, that was it. I had just felt so close to somebody and it felt so safe and it felt so warm and it felt so comfortable. And maybe that's just because of where I was in leaving that old relationship and entering a new one or whatever. But it was just so beautiful. So it took us about 6 months after that to get together officially.
I love that. What a great story.
We got married 2 years ago. We bought a house. We have no children, but 5 cats, and that's great. That's all the joy that we need in taking care of things, our cats. And I have a great life. And, you know, and I say this because she's an amazing person. She's made me realize how much I have to offer to the world. I didn't really realize it prior to being in a relationship with her. And she's such a mover and shaker. She's really in the community. She's the director of our local farmers market. She has a master's in public health. She has a background in emergency preparedness. You know, Napa's been through quite a lot of emergencies. So she's been able to leverage all of that, her past, to be really embedded in the community. She's an executive director. She's a president of a board. I mean, she's just an amazing woman who makes me a better person and holds me accountable to all of my crazy bullshit. And, you know, we do programs side by side. So, you know, you're asking me what's one of the things I'm going to do. Because of my family history, I am an Al-Anon. I'm a proud member of Al-Anon, and I love that program. I'm second round, actually. I'm working my steps for the second time over with a new sponsor. I will have a meeting with my sponsor soon, and I'll talk about this, and we'll talk about what came up. She'll ask me how this is feeding my ego, and I'll have to tell her how I'm monitoring all of that and all those things.
I love it.
But program has been really helpful for me. Me and my wife have been sober for 5 years, a history of self-soothing and coping with what happened to me with alcohol and drugs. And I started smoking weed in 6th grade, and I started smoking cigarettes in 5th grade. I started drinking beer in middle school. Like I started this stuff really, really young. Like by the time I was a junior in high school, I had the drinking problems and the drug stuff, and I was well into using and deluding myself into thinking I was using methamphetamines to get straight A's. And that happened and that worked, and that partly helped me get to college. But, those were all things that I was doing to myself to keep me from thinking about my deep secret that I was hiding. Yeah. I mean, I had pushed that secret. It was like inside of the nail of my pinky toe. I had shoved that secret down so far and was not going to talk about it with anybody. And to keep that up, that level up, and to maintain that level of perfection and everything is okay, took a lot out of me, a lot of energy, a lot of drugs, and a lot of alcohol to just sometimes even just like fall asleep at night. I don't even know the extent that my parents even know how much I was using. I was using so much. I was stealing alcohol. That's because I didn't know what to do with what was going on inside. And then also it was that little picture I showed you earlier, me at 4 years old cutting my own head off. That was always something that felt available to me, hurting myself. I remember being in high school and I toyed with like cutting a little bit. Didn't really stick. It actually hurt. I'm really a big baby when it comes to pain. My pain threshold is really low. I have a very vivid memory of almost shooting myself with my dad's gun. I OD'd. I just graduated from high school. I was in like community college. I remember I did like really shitty on a test or something. And I went home and threw a party, and then I OD'd in the bathroom trying to kill myself. One of my ex-boyfriends shoved a carrot down my throat and made me throw up. I was throwing up blue. I spent 2 days. My parents were gone that week, and I spent 2 days hallucinating. Pretty sure my liver was probably dying from all the pills that I had taken and all the stuff that I had taken. And no one took me to the hospital. No one called 911. It was just like, make her throw up. And, let's not tell mom and dad about this. I know my sister was there. My best friend was there. And these are things that have happened that no one's ever talked to me about. People have been around me while I've been even, harming myself or doing things, and still not even having those conversations too, which is also why I want to talk about this stuff. I'm very big on talk. If you can, if it's safe for you to talk with somebody, anybody, finding that one person and do it. And I was fortunate, now to talk a little bit about that one person for me. I was really, really, really lucky in high school, freshman year, to have an English teacher. Actually, the reason why I go by Bailie was this teacher. Her name's Miss Lukey. Love her to death. Hi, Miss Lukey. She started calling me Bailie, and it was the first time someone called me that. And it was like, I felt seen. I felt like somebody saw me. And I had never liked my name, Heather. Heather had really long hair, was really confused, hated herself. I just never really felt like that person. So when Miss Lukey started calling me Bailie, I was like, oh, okay. I like this. Mm-hmm. This is kind of cool. Yeah. And now that I graduated, she actually calls me Heather now. She still calls me by my first name, even though she used to never call me that in high school. It's really funny. And I don't think she really understood the significance of how much it meant to me that she named me, and that I've kept that name. The way that I got away from home in Southern California, not that I had to get away or escape. Living in Bellflower, California, there was no real future for me or promise staying there. And so school was really what got me out. It was Miss Lukey that actually got me to apply for colleges, and who showed me that I was a smart person. And she's like, you can actually write. Why don't you try writing? I started journaling, and I've been journaling ever since. And now I have tons of journals. Me and Miss Lukey used to write emails to each other, and I saved all of those emails. So I have this documentation of fights I've had with my mom and all these amazing artifacts from my past that I have.
So that begs the question, when is the book coming out?
Oh, I don't know.
You have to write a book.
I've been thinking and leaning into that more seriously over the last year than I think I have. I've always said that I'm going to do something like that with this. I just don't know what. And I've had people tell me what you just reflected back to me. It's just, I feel like I'm still writing my story. I feel like I haven't reached the end quite yet, or I don't even know what the end's going to be. I mean, I know that the end is not going to be me jumping off the bridge. That's for sure. But it's a good place to start. And I'm happy we started there today.
I'm impressed with you. I have had so much enjoyment out of sitting here listening to you. And like I said, it easily could go on for hours and hours. And I can already tell there are going to be many more episodes. You are going to be part of my series. My ongoing series person is going to be Bailie. So
awesome.
We are going to be doing this many times in the future.
Yeah.
You're ready
Well, cool.
for that?
Well, let's
Yes.
talk offline about specific topics and things that we could really hone in on. I know that I went all over the place today in trying to share my story with Reaping.
It's perfect. It's what the listeners love about this show, I think, is that people are given the freedom and safety to talk about anything. And that is so important to me. So the fact that you've taken advantage of that and utilized it is meaningful to me in ways that I can't say thank you enough for.
You're very welcome. This relationship that we're building is meaningful to me as well. I knew that from the first moment we talked on the phone. I was like, I like Dave. And I love your background. Thank you for all those years that you dedicated your life to serving victims and trying to bring justice, whatever that means, to the person that was stuck in the system. And I'm not saying that negatively. It's just a fact that people get stuck in a system and it doesn't always serve them, which is also why in me talking about the person that harmed me and how I sit with that and justice for me, I never got justice. And I don't think that that form of justice is what I need, my point of my life right now. And I know that I'm not the only one that thinks about their victimization and the person that harmed them in that way too. Yeah. And that's the other thing in terms of uplifting stories and hearing stories from a lot of different people is you're going to hear people's ideas of what justice means to them and what resolution means to them. All of those things. The sexual violence movement is just starting to talk about restorative justice and other means of serving justice that aren't carceral and putting people into prisons and furthering harm and perpetuating systems of oppression in that way. So there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Where
there's
we could go in different directions.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of interest.
Yeah. And I love that you brought the whole aspect of the different definitions of justice, because I talk about justice a lot and even tell my audience, we all have a responsibility, even those of us who are victims and survivors. We have a responsibility to other victims and survivors or people who are vulnerable and could be victims of sexual assault. Bringing justice to someone means so many different things to so many different people, as you just said. And sometimes justice is just being believed. Mm-hmm. Because it's so common for people not to believe. Like you said, you were worried about whether or not your parents would believe you. And the fact that they actually believed you was a huge relief. Mm-hmm. And that is such an important part of justice, and not blaming victims and survivors for their own sexual assault is another form of justice. It means taking care of those who need to be taken care of in ways that they haven't been. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to thank Bailie for her absolutely powerful and impactful interview with me, and for the time she took from her schedule to be with us to tell her story. Bailie, this was an experience to remember, and I'm excited about the prospect of you coming back. I'm truly looking forward to it. As Bailie mentioned, she would be happy to hear from you, especially if you are part of the LGBTQ community and are struggling with your past of being a victim or survivor of childhood sexual assault and are struggling with telling your story or just need someone to talk to. Bailie is a willing listener and great to talk to. Her contact information is in the episode notes. I also want to thank each of you for listening to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. This podcast is growing, and it's because of you, my loyal listeners, who are telling others about the podcast and sharing links to the episodes. It's exciting for me to hear from you and to have so many of you who are willing to be on this show. This platform is a safe place for you to tell your sexual assault or rape story to help on your healing journey. It's also helping other listeners heal, so thank you for reaching out to me. Please remember to subscribe, rate this podcast, and leave me a comment of how the podcast has impacted your life or the life of someone you know. Your comments are always welcome. And please remember to do your part to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape or sexual assault. A great way to do this is to share a link to this podcast. And another great way is to start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been affected by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.